Hello, everyone. I would like to open this regular council meeting for June 10th. And recognize that we are gathering on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And we are, as always, grateful for their grace and collaboration in governing these lands. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor? Wow, they're just the three of us. It's very sparse up here. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And adoption of the regular council meeting minutes, May 27th, and Village Hall meeting, June 3rd. Thank you. And thank you. And all in favor? That's everybody. And receipt of the Advisory Planning Commission minutes as well, please.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor? And we have our first delegation ready to roll, and it is Sherry Westrop and Teresa Clinton and Andrew Gage online. Go ahead. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak about the Soo Big Oil campaign here on the traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. The slogan for this campaign is Soo Big Oil, but behind the campaign are the principles of economic justice and fiscal responsibility. Sorry, I need my notes too. Just last week, it was reported that the municipalities of Abbotsford, Merritt, and Princeton were denied support from the Federal Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. They are still trying to recover from the catastrophic events of 2021. The responsibility for mitigation and reparation falls upon the municipalities again and again. Who should pay? I moved to Vancouver Island last year from Kelowna. The views of Okanagan Lake from my regular hike were stunning. Across the lake, you can see West Kelowna. This was one of the reasons I was ready to leave the Okanagan Valley. Summers in the Okanagan are regularly called fire season, and last year's was the worst I experienced there. Sorry. This is the reason.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a better reason.
It was actually very beautiful there. So this was the West Kelowna fire last summer in August. Last year's fire season was the worst I experienced there. I looked forward to living in Cumberland, part of Vancouver Island's rainforest. When I arrived here, I was alarmed to see how dry everything was and how close the entire village is to a forest that is littered with potential fuels that could easily support wildfire. The fire in West Kelowna jumped the lake 2 kilometers and started a fire in my neighborhood. How far from the forested areas are the homes in Cumberland? 2 kilometers or less. Cumberland has already demonstrated knowledge of and commitment to the need to be proactive in planning for a future in which climate change is a factor. This kind of planning requires funding at a level that our small community cannot generate without significant increases in property taxes and grant funding. The wastewater treatment plant upgrades that have resulted in the need to borrow $2.5 million are one example of a cost to our community members. Imagine the cost of catastrophic wildfire. Why should fossil fuel companies be sued? Scientists are increasingly able to quantify the specific contributions of individual companies through their operations and products to climate change. Just 90 entities, so this graphic is quite confusing in some ways, but it has the 90 entities that we're talking about, are mostly fossil fuel companies, and they're responsible for almost 2/3 of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. This is Edward Teller. You might remember him featured in the movie Oppenheimer quite recently. In 1959, at the 100-year celebration of the first U.S. oil well being drilled, he addressed oil executives, and he predicted at that time to this room full of people who were profiting from these industries, he predicted that the buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would cause global temperatures to rise, resulting in catastrophic sea levels that could submerge coastal cities like New York City. That was in 1959. This graph on the left of the slide is from a 1982 study commissioned by Exxon themselves. If you look closely, and it's difficult, from where you sit, but if you look at the year 2020, I'm just going to go over and point it out, which would be here. We've got the year 2000. Here's 2020. You can see that the scientists who were hired and commissioned by Exxon predicted very well the concentrations of carbon dioxide that are currently in the atmosphere. Their models have, unfortunately, proven to be very accurate. What did they do with this knowledge? Well, they misinformed the public, lobbied governments to prevent them from signing climate agreements like the Kyoto Protocol in 1998, and kept making massive profits. Although they bought or researched low emissions technology, they failed to develop those patents, instead investing in expanding oil, gas, and coal. And even now, fossil fuel companies continue to put their short-term profits over the health of our communities. Recently, BP, Shell, and Suncor rolled back their climate commitments because they are literally making too much money from fossil fuels. When governments started taking action in the late 80s and early 90s, industry upped its game. Journalists, academics, scientists, and others have documented the shocking history of misinformation, lobbying, and false solutions which prevented climate action. Subig oil is legally possible. This type of case can succeed. We've seen it in lawsuits against tobacco and opioids. We've seen it in the Netherlands in 2021. The environmental organization in this photo, Milieu Défensif, won their lawsuit against Shell in Dutch courts. To date, there are over 40 local and state governments suing fossil fuel companies in the US, as well as similar cases in Germany and Switzerland. And 28 Canadian law professors have written a letter to local governments explaining that there is a legal basis in Canadian law. Subig oil is financially manageable. Because the lawsuit is brought as a class action lawsuit, local governments can pool their resources. Not only that, but BC's class action law protects the parties from having to pay a portion of the other side's legal fees if unsuccessful. The Subig Oil campaign proposes that each local government commit $1 per resident into the litigation fund. Subig oil is popular. Polls have indicated that approximately 69% of people that were polled either strongly support or somewhat support the action. Locally, when Teresa and I have been petitioning out on the streets of Cumberland, the people that came to our table, we would say we got about 85 to 90% uptake. People that were, when they found out what it was, they were willing to sign the petition. So the way this would work, in order to benefit our community, is that a judge would confirm that there's a winnable case. At this first stage, we're going to have local governments and the fossil fuel industry being given a clear indication that this case can be won. The result of even that will have people changing their investment strategies. And in the event of a successful class action, we will attain needed resources for our communities, and we're going to have changes in the actions of corporate, investor, and government behavior. The communities of Gibsons, View Royal, Squamish, Qualicum Beach, Port Moody, Slocan, and Burnaby have committed to support the class action. Communities working together, like we're asking of you, turns hope into action. Thank you for your attention, and we welcome your questions.
Thanks so much. Council, do you have questions or comments?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I've got it. Hi, thank you, guys. Great presentation. A couple of questions. I understand that you need a community to lead the, has that community been identified or found yet? A community to lead the class action lawsuit?
I'll let Andrew Gage answer that question.
Oh, hi, Andrew.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for the question. No, that's correct. So at this point, what we're asking is the local governments pledge their support for the class action and that they will work together to bring a class action. That doesn't mean you're signing on as a named plaintiff. So there's actually no real legal risk to Cumberland arising from what we're asking for today. One or more municipalities will need to, once we've got municipalities discussing among themselves who can bring this, will need to step forward and be the named plaintiff. The risks to them are still manageable, but they are actually stepping into the role of a final lawsuit. And at this point, no, we've had some conversations with a couple of municipalities, but there's a chicken and egg aspect to this. We can't expect one local government to just leap into it when there's been no sort of public discussion about this, and there's not any indication that other municipalities are looking for this. But there are municipalities that are sort of waiting and saying, well, we're not going to do this until we've seen that there's a lead plaintiff signed on. So we've been leaning into asking municipalities to pledge support for the idea and to say that they will put money into it if and when that lead plaintiff comes forward. But at this point, we don't have a lead plaintiff. That will be a key step in terms of getting the lawsuit filed.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess, so with the, you're asking for approximately $5,000 from us. Would we need to put that up front then, or would that be, we're just pledging it and that would be payable if and when the suit comes forward?
Different municipalities have dealt with it differently, but certainly there are municipalities that have just said that they will bring it forward to another vote when to confirm the funding when the case is going forward. Other municipalities have actually put it into future budgets or indicated where in their budget the funds are going to come from, but that's up to the individual municipality.
Okay, thank you.
Just had one question actually. So the outcome you're looking for with this, is it a financial settlement that would go then be dispersed between the municipalities to mitigate the effects of climate change, or would you be looking more for a behavioral change on the part of big oil companies, or how would it be enforced locally in BC, or the outcome that you're looking for in BC?
I think the outcome we're ultimately looking for is both, but the court case would be focused on getting compensation for local governments. There might well be also an ask related to asking the court to order changes in behavior, which is actually what the Dutch case that Sherry mentioned was about. But those cases, it's difficult to enforce that type of order internationally. Whereas an order for a finding of debt can actually be enforced internationally against these global companies. So the lawsuit would primarily be focused on obtaining compensation, and I think that's why you, as a local government, have not just jurisdiction but actually a responsibility, because this is about mitigating the costs to your taxpayers. By doing that, it does change corporate behavior. There's a study from the Grantham Institute at the London School of Economics where they've measured the effect on stock prices of filing this type of lawsuit or other lawsuits against companies. So it's a basic economic that as long as you have this situation where the industry believes it has no responsibility for the harm caused, it's very difficult to it's understandable that they make the types of short-sighted decisions that they have been making. But when you actually force them to have some of those costs on their balance sheets, it better reflects the reality of the harm they're causing and results in better decisions that and change in both investor and corporate behavior is the hope. So I hope that answers the question. The answer is yes, both.
Okay, no, thank you. One of the things I remember having worked on the Exxon spill, believe it or not, or the follow-up, is that $1 billion went towards the fine to pay for the mitigation, the cleanup effects, and really that it didn't really put much of a dent in their overall profits. I think it was a quarter that they lost with that. It did, however, fund science for the next 25 years or something.
It also was one of the cases and situations that led to the development of a global oil spill cleanup fund, which the oil and gas industry still has to pay into against future harm. So one of the possible outcomes of this in the long term, probably not the immediate result of this case, but as more of these cases come forward, is a global price on carbon charged to these companies. Because right now, the fossil fuel industry and the governments that support them have largely had their interest in the climate talks has been to actually make sure that issues of liability and responsibility are not addressed. And there's never been a global, successful imposition of a global price on carbon. This could help pave the way for that if we follow the example of those oil spill cases.
Thank you. That's a great answer. I like that.
Yeah, I believe when I've had this conversation with all of you before that this is not so much about suing big oil, but more about recouping the costs for communities to have to do this adaptation and mitigation work around climate change. And so at some point we would have to provide that evidence in order to be compensated. Is that the case?
So the way the structure works is as Sherry was saying, that there'll be an initial ruling by a judge confirming that this case should be heard as a class action, and that judge will identify. First of all, will confirm that there's a credible case to be brought. So that's an important step. We believe there is, obviously, but it's important to have that confirmed by the courts. But the judge will also identify the common issues, meaning the issues that municipalities have all in common. And those will be things like, suffering, the types of harm being suffered, but not the quantity, not the amounts. And whether a municipality can bring this type of case, whether the fossil fuel companies are appropriate defendants. So those issues will be the common issues. They'll be dealt with first. The issues of how much each municipality is owed would be at a subsequent stage once the case was successful on the common issues. So if the municipalities bringing the case prove that they can bring this type of case, the companies are liable, here's the basis for their liability, then there would be negotiations at that point. There's a good possibility that the case could just settle, and then there'd have to be an agreement about how to distribute the funds to the different municipalities, in which case there might not be as much need for sort of specific evidence to be determined, or it could go to a future stage where Cumberland or other municipalities would need to actually apply to court and prove their particular harm and get a specific order for their share of the order. So I guess the question is yes, the answer is yes, that could well be the case. We don't know for certain when that would occur or whether to what degree that to what level of evidence would be required. But regardless, I think beginning to understand how much climate change is costing us is a matter of good public policy. And so whenever possible, we do encourage local governments to try to understand and quantify those costs.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, we've seen it in our wastewater project, like you said, having to deal with the extreme heat and atmospheric river events. So we had to adapt our design to accommodate that. So it's definitely a thing. And if you look at Merritt and their overspilled wastewater system and fire and highway washes outs, and we're all paying for that already. So, yeah. Thank you so much. Did you have something else?
Just have one more question. So, developing a climate action strategy as a community like ours, that strengthens the position quite obviously over doing nothing. Would that be something where you'd be wanting to partner more with people, just to show that we're not just bystanders, as it were, and everyone's going around business as usual and then joining on to a class action lawsuit? Is that how would you recommend us going about that, or is what Cumberland's doing sufficient in your eyes?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question, but let me try and answer it, and you can tell me whether I have.
Okay, can I
or did
maybe
you-
try and clarify? We do have a climate action strategy here, so that would bolster our participation perhaps in the process as as opposed to somebody or a community that doesn't have such a strategy in place or policy in place.
Mhm. No, I mean, I think ultimately we're not saying that the fossil fuel industries are going to end up paying everything, and our communities are going to pay nothing. We are saying that everyone plays a major role. This industry's played more of a role, but we absolutely all need to be doing our part to reduce greenhouse gases, and also climate strategies often also identify a lot of the costs that we need to be spending to prepare our communities and to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So I absolutely agree that both the adaptation and mitigation side of planning for climate change is really important. And I think it's important to highlight that participating in this type of action doesn't let us off the hook. And absolutely, we do need to be working hard to reduce emissions. It looks like Teresa has something to say as well.
I'll go to Councillor Therrien first, and then Teresa.
Thanks. Yeah, I just one more question about, is this suit going to be addressing historical costs, or are you going to be looking into the future as well? We're going to be paying for this for a long time.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good question. So where there's a cost that has been incurred that we know is climate related, there's an argument that there's a limitation period that starts running, like where that it was caused by that. So costs that are more than 2 years old may be harder to recover. That's not to say that there's not still arguments to be made there, but just to be frank, I mean, the companies are going to argue that if you're going to sue them, you should have done it earlier. The counter to that is this is an ongoing nuisance. We are continue to have things get worse and worse, and the cost to build up. So that should allow us to be more backward looking. But forward looking, where you are actually incurring costs now to mitigate against future costs. So adaptation, basically, where you're building measures so that you won't have the impacts. Those are sort of forward-looking costs that you are incurring or intending to incur in the near future. Those absolutely can be included. Far out costs may be harder in the sense that if you know you will incur the costs and that's provable, then yes, absolutely. But where there's some uncertainty about exactly what you're going to need to do, it could be harder. That being said, I should make it clear, West Coast Environmental Law will not be the legal lawyers bringing this case. We're pushing for this as a matter of public policy and as part of the Sue Big Oil campaign. The lead plaintiff will hire their own legal team, and they may use different strategies to try to catch as many of the costs as possible. The county of Multnomah County in Oregon, who's filed a lawsuit there, actually has asked the court there for almost a preemptive fund that the companies will be ordered to pay into to cover both the planning to address future costs and the future costs themselves. The lawyers bringing the case will have to see whether there's some basis to do that under Canadian law. It's something that is really interesting, but maybe a stretch under Canadian law. But I think that the legal team will want to look at any and all options to invite the court to deal with this fairly. I'm sorry not to give a more concrete answer in terms of here's what will happen.
It's okay. We know you're a lawyer. Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, Andrew's a lawyer and I'm the community member. just wanted to kind of bring it all back after going through the legalities of the whole thing. Is the thing that attracted me to this whole process was that I'm very community oriented. And that's a big thrust of this whole process, is that we want all the communities in British Columbia to get together and work together to make a difference. Last week, I was in the grade 7 class at the local Cumberland school, and to talk to them about climate change. And I asked the kids, they're 13 years old, one of them's here, and I asked them, put your hand up if you're worried about climate change and what's happening to the planet. 2/3 of those kids put their hands up. Then I asked them, and how many of you think you can do something about it, or you can do nothing about it? How many of you feel powerless about this? More than 2/3 of the class put their hands up. So to me, this is the reason why I'm doing this, and why I think communities really need to get together, because together we have the power to do this. And as you pointed out, Councillor Therian, these things are coming down the pipe. These kids are going to inherit this. And if we don't start doing something now about this, it's not going to get any better. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so there's a recommendation to receive that delegation, I believe.
Yeah, I'll move receipt.
Thank you.
Second.
And third. Okay. Solid waste management planning. Come on up.
Wonderful.
Thanks for being here.
Yes. Thank you very much. Through the CAO to the mayor, I guess, is how it goes here. I'm Sarah Willey with Comox Strathcona Waste Management. I'm joined today by my colleagues Vivian Shaw and Mark Rutten. So I'm in the policy and planning realm in solid waste, and Vivian's our senior manager. Mark's our general manager of engineering. So we're here today to talk about the solid waste management plan. This is a long-term plan that many of you be familiar with, in terms of climate action or strategies. So for Comox Strathcona Waste Management, we're looking at the long-term sort of disposal options and diversion options for garbage and recycling. So for those not familiar, Comox Strathcona Waste Management is sort of a branded name of a service that operates under Comox Valley Regional District. So it used to be one regional district, it split up. Waste and hospitals were kept together. So in order to ensure our partners to the north were feeling welcome within this umbrella, we have that name to make us unique. So our service area is quite big, and it extends up to Sayward and out to Zeballos and Tassis. And we do have landfills in both Zeballos and Tassis, and an inert landfill that remains in Gold River as well. Our landfill in Campbell River we closed last year, so we're transferring waste down here to Cumberland, and then we backhaul the organics north to our organics facility that's located next to the closed landfill. And then recycling facilities as well in a number of communities. We've got 4 major islands and a number of other small islands as well that we serve. So it's a broad service. So our plan is really just trying to pull our heads up from the day-to-day operations. So, we have a number of staff that are really focused on keeping the doors open and the garbage, getting buried. And we don't want to be caught off guard, with assets coming to end of life or, landfills filling up, and also just evolving needs of communities and population. So we last updated this plan in 2012, and, one of the things that you look at in this graphic is just that cost of tipping. So from $45 to $140, that was the 2020, we're at $155 per ton now. That was really a representation of not lifting that number up to plan for future needs. So it's not just increasing, increasing populations, it's also, as we continue to consume, and the laws don't prevent excessive packaging, and in this transition to an online economy where things are coming within boxes and packaging around that, there's an increase not just in waste but also in recycling that needs to be managed, and that's part of our purview as well. So as I mentioned, our last plan approved in 2013, and we look to renew these plans every 10 years or so. We did a 5-year review around 2017, 2018. Thank you very much. But we do recognize that those needs are changing and that there is significant population growth within our region. Certainly Cumberland's no stranger to that. So across our entire service area, it's 13%, certainly higher here in the village. And what we've seen is that, you know, in adjacent communities and even in our own, is that these long-term solutions don't happen overnight. So if you need to plan for a new disposal facility, then you need to think about that much further ahead than a year or two. And that's part of our conversation. So our goal is to continue to produce less garbage. Right now, we're about middle of the pack within the province at 551 kilograms per person. And when you think about that number, put it in the context of, you know, you may not do a renovation that year, but somebody might, you know, but you'll probably do one over the course of 10 years or 20 years, and those weights contribute as well. So it's all of the waste that's buried. It's all the waste buried not just from residents, but also from businesses in the community and construction in the community. So, you know, as a collective, that is the per person waste generation. We're aiming for 350 kilograms. That's achievable. There are some jurisdictions that are managing to get their numbers down lower than us. South of us in Nanaimo and Cowichan, Capital Regional District, they're really at the top of the pack. So we're following in their footsteps and learning from them. In terms of our tonnage right now, it's, you know, coming into the Cumberland landfill, it's about 65,000 tons per year. And then we also have, as I mentioned, additional landfills. And there's other private landfills that operate in Campbell River as well. And then we do manage a significant amount of just diverted materials. So whether that's drywall, wood waste, scrap metal, and then your typical blue box materials that are dropped off, not necessarily the curbside ones. Kind of following in the footsteps of the previous delegation here, greenhouse gases are a consequence of landfilling garbage. And we're, you know, looking forward to seeing significant reductions in the greenhouse gases through the implementation of our organics program and expansion of it recently into our larger communities of Courtenay and Campbell River. So we appreciate the contribution of Cumberland residents over the past number of years working with us through our pilot. The other way that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as you'll see, landfills are the major source, is through landfill gas capture and destruction. So we've turned on the landfill gas system in Campbell River, and that's significantly will reduce the landfill emissions coming from there. So that when that landfill closed, we put a cover over top. We installed wells to pull the landfill gas out and direct it to a flare and burn those emissions. We have considered a feasibility study on whether something better could be done, but as it's a closed landfill, the gas quantities are continuing to decline basically from the day you put the last bit of garbage in there. So it's a challenging economic business case, but we are pursuing that as well here in Cumberland to consider beneficial use of the gas and not just flaring. This is an eye test, and if you can read it out loud with your left eye covered, then you pass. So I apologize for the small text, but it's in your agenda as well if you want to get the nitty-gritties. But I think what really reflects for me when I look back in time through the solid waste management planning process from the 90s until today is how incremental it is. You know, it's not a leaps and bounds situation, and you know we've lived through blue boxes being introduced to curbside, you know, being ubiquitous, to organics rolling out, to recycling. Kids these days just, they expect that those things are going to happen, and there's going to be future generations that expect us even more from us. And so that's kind of the bar that we're trying to set now for the next 10 years is how are we going to level up from where we were in the past. So our last 10 years since our plan was implemented were very capital intensive. So, you know, the fallout of our last plan was really about disposal and where are we going to put garbage. Our Campbell River landfill and our Pigeon Lake landfill were filling up. We had limited lifespan left in both, and the decision was made to consolidate that waste and to create an engineered landfill, a modern landfill here in Cumberland. And we were successful in doing that. So, in addition to closing 2 landfills, opening and operating a new landfill, building a leachate treatment facility, landfill gas capture and destruction, we also built an organics transfer station and an organics facility for processing that waste. So for a small team, that was a lot to accomplish. So we're looking forward now that our capital and our assets are in place to really moving forward with a lot of programs and services to emphasize the education to best use those resources, and as well to expand into other sectors. So just to highlight for you a sphere of influence, as a local government and a partner, there are areas where, we can definitely use your support. You operate the residential collection service here for the village as well as the downtown core. We've got public area waste collection. Certainly you have a lot of tourists coming to town and using the wonderful trail network that you have here. And then building and business permits. And we've certainly explored some opportunities through the redevelopment of the historic downtown with your planners on looking at deconstruction instead of demolition, and opportunities for that. So, it's planning for space for waste receptacles, not to be the last thing that people consider, and planning, especially with your old housing stock, to potentially utilize that valuable old growth fir and 2x4s that are in there. And then, we're thinking downstream. So we're going to get all that waste, and we're trying to use your influences to help us achieve our goals. All right, so back to the point. The solid waste management plan process. We're 2 years in. Oh my God, it never ends. So we started in 2022, and we wanted to make folks aware of this. We did an online survey, and we also recruited for our advisory committee. And then last year we went out with our goals and guiding principles. So it's been pretty high level to date, and now we're kind of getting into the meat of things, and we're working through a number of strategies, presenting to our advisory and our board. And then Councillor Sullivan is the representative on the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board here from the village of Cumberland. And sorry, Troy, you're now the representative. My apologies. I remember Sean, he was memorable. I don't know. And we've got those presentations and a roundtable coming in the fall. So there'll be a great discussion to come. And then looking forward, we've got evaluation of those options to achieve that 350 or to attempt to. And then we're wanting to present this draft report to the province in early 2026. So I mentioned our advisory committee, and I want to acknowledge the great contributions from your wonderful Rob Crisfield there in the back. Everyone give him props. He's just hiding. Yeah. He always shows up. He's very pragmatic, and I can always look for him to speak his voice and represent your community well. So I thank him for taking his time to join. I know that he's pulled in a lot of directions. So the advisory committee's met for over 40 hours already, both online and in person, and it's been great to hear. We've got 15 representatives from the public. We've got our technical committee members like Rob, and then we have 2 board representatives from our chairs. And so, as I mentioned, we did the survey, and the general outcomes for there were improved facilities, diversion, convenience, and wide range of materials. So in that early survey that we did, we had 45 Cumberland responses. And, I kind of was teasing through the data, trying to find something interesting to say here. And I think what came across to me was that folks that are in a suite seem to have less awareness or utilization of the curbside food waste disposal. So that came through, single family homes seem to be really on top of it, and the suite might be more of your transient population that hasn't been here as long or isn't staying for as long, and therefore maybe hasn't heard about the great opportunity there. And then in terms of willingness to divert, we had a question for folks, what were they most willing to do? And drop off at a depot is unfortunately the least willing thing that people are able to do. And so that, that creates a barrier even here for the residents of Cumberland, where I'd say that, the depot is 7 days a week and quite accessible for folks relative to, people in other parts of our electoral areas or even municipalities. So this is a little plug for our engagement page. So you're all familiar with engagecomoxvalley.ca, and we have a page there for the solid waste management plan. We have 6 goals and 8 guiding principles, and I encourage you to explore the page and check out the other information with all the spare time that you have. And generally just to say that they're high level and they're aspirational, and we're going to set our targets as we move forward to try and make sure that those are achievable. But the goals and guiding principles are really what are leading us forward. So then last year we did a number of great events. We were in all the communities, and here in Cumberland, what we did was a landfill tour in the summer. So in July we had our first public open house. We'd never really, we've had school tours for a number of years, and we've hosted other private groups, but this was our first time opening our doors to the public. It went really well, I think. We had 142 participants, 5 busloads of people that came through on a very warm day. And up top at the landfill, we had we called it a party zone, but officially it was an educational area. And we had a lot of engagement from folks, and then at the end we trapped them into participating in our survey for our solid waste management plan. But from that we heard a lot of feedback. Certainly residents were from Cumberland, but also other communities, but summarized the feedback there that people, it's fairly nothing that would really surprise you if you're engaged in this field, but reiterating the need that we have. We created some great resources through that, so conveyed some technical information. We had something for the kids as well. They had to find all the raccoons on the little sign. Can you find the raccoon on this sign? He's right here. He's at the top of the landfill.
Well,
there he is. Yeah. Trash pandas everywhere. And so we're going to continue to build on that this year, and we'll be offering our next open house in September. So September 14th, mark your calendars. And as part of our engagement as well with the village, we'll be formally offering the council. We know this council hasn't had an opportunity to come for a tour of our facility. So we'd offer you a tour as well, any staff members who would be able to join, and, if there's engaged community members that you'd want to welcome that are, partners in watershed protection or whatever else that makes sense, may as well fill the bus up. So we'll put a date forward through your staff to propose something that works, because we do want to share all the great work that we're doing out there and make sure that you understand how seriously we take our responsibility for environmental protection. Going forward, strategies and options. How do we build on what we've got so far? We really want to look at the construction and demolition, events, business waste, multifamily sector. Those are some areas that we think there's still a lot of potential and growth that can happen. So I mentioned the landfill tour. We'll also be holding our first organics facility open house the following weekend in Campbell River to open that opportunity up. We know that people are curious, and certainly if anyone's willing, come on up. And we'll be looking at the financial and resource implications, and as I mentioned, bringing that back to the board. We've got our landfill here that's permitted for 3 cells. We're in the second cell now. The first cell will reach capacity this year. The second cell is, scheduled, but things will change for 2037. And the third cell, it's a bit hard to predict the year, but it has 800,000 cubic meters of capacity or thereabouts. So one thing that we are looking at is our current permit is for 185 meters in final height. So that's 185 above sea level, not above the ground. Before the panic hits. For reference,
Where are we?
The other landfill, what I call the Pigeon Lake landfill. I'm trying to give these names. I don't know. It's unofficial though, right, Mark? So the old landfill, I call it the Pigeon Lake landfill because that's what everyone seems to call it. And then the new landfill, I call it the Bevan landfill. I'm hoping it catches on. But the Pigeon Lake landfill is 185 meters at its final height. So that gives you an idea of where that representative number is. And then one of the things that we can really do, there's 2 things that we can do to get the most value out of our landfill. And one is that, on the specified footprint that we have, that we've spent millions of dollars to create that liner for, if we can maximize the height of that landfill, going up 3 to 1, we can basically make, more revenue off of the same capital investment. And so that would reduce the taxpayer investment in that facility over its life. So it has the ability to go as high as 212 meters above sea level. So that would fit more waste essentially into the same footprint. And if you consider, just for cell 3, or cells 1 through 3, I should say, that could be an additional $51 million in tipping fees that could fit into that same footprint. So then you can spread that capital investment over more loads and reduce the overall tip fee. The other significant way that we can reduce and extend the life of the landfill, reduce costs and extend the life of the landfill, would be efficiency in operations. And so we're working hard to do that as well. The more garbage you can fit in there, there's always some cover material for environmental reasons. But we work hard on shredding that material and exploring other ways, compacting it as best we can. But we certainly see that as a valuable asset to the region, and we're grateful for the opportunity and for the village for having us within your community. And I just want to plug that we employ 25 or so people out there, and as well we support lots of local mechanics and welders and, other sub-trades to support our operations. So thank you very much.
Plus you also give us that host amenity fund, which is super helpful.
Glad
for
you brought.
us.
I didn't want to brag about it, but thank you for.
So we very much appreciate that. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really great. Questions, comments?
I have a few questions, actually. So beyond cell 3, have you thought about which lake we're going to drain for the following landfill? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That's literally what happened with Pigeon Lake. That's what they call it. There's some really good strategies in there. And I'm just wondering, since Nanaimo did such a pretty good job about lowering it, was it a combination of those measures? There was one that stood out in particular that you thought really was good to focus on?
I mean, they have curbside collection 3-stream across their entire service area, including the electoral area, and they've had that for a number of years. So their decision when they saw their landfill reaching end of life was to go all in on diversion. So that was one strategy that has worked well for them, and they've over time, because it does take time to change behaviors, been able to successfully divert. They've also made the geography of every regional district is different. Yeah. And so we try not to say that it's apples to apples. So when you look at that map that we showed you, we have some really far away communities that we have to support because there just wouldn't be an economic driver for businesses like ours to exist. So the public funds, diversion and disposal in small communities that are remote. Nanaimo has a much more concentrated population. So they've decided to drive a lot of that diversion to the private sector. And that's something that we're looking to explore in our urban areas. So we have, great relationships with Pacific Wood Waste. We send them a lot of our wood waste and they get a lot directly. And then in Campbell River, there's private landfills that can accept construction demolition waste. And so we're exploring ideas to try and, incentivize more of that waste to come out of our landfill where we can accept residential waste. So there's construction demolition, and then there's what you call putrescible waste, which is the stuff that breaks down and smells bad. Yeah. And so those are a different permit, and we're the only permitted landfill for that within our region. So, it makes sense to kind of send that material that way if we can. So I think those are sort of two things that they've done that are ahead of us. And we do have some bylaws that we're considering as one of the strategies that will be presented to the board in the next meeting and have gone through advisory already. So, and they mirror some of the work that Nanaimo's doing as well.
Okay. There's just a plug for what the city of Delta does. They have a throw your stuff out on the curb and everyone scavenges weekend, and it's phenomenal. Like I feel like it's a bit of a festival like atmosphere, but I think it diverts a lot of things that people would otherwise just throw out. So I think we should consider that, if not in Cumberland, but throughout the whole region as well. People literally drive around in trucks with trailers on the back, and then you'll see the stuff repurposed and end up in furniture stores in Vancouver and things like that, rather than just that old Chesterfield goes in the dump. So yep. that was a more of a comment than a plug of an idea. My last question is, and this is kind of for the folks at home, I hear a lot of people say, oh, not too much of the recyclables get diverted. They just end up in the landfill anyway. What kind of capture rates do we have? Or I know that's kind of putting you on the spot for numbers and that, but for the folks that are apathetic about recycling at home, how good a job do we do in actually recovering that material?
Yeah, I won't try and throw numbers out, but I think and this is a conversation, it was literally the first question we got asked by the advisory group, and it's definitely something that the media has eroded that is quite frustrating for us. As we mentioned, this behavior change is like a generational thing. So there's two, in British Columbia, there's two streams of recycling. There's residential recycling, and then there's non-residential recycling. So if you're participating in your curbside program, or if you're coming to our depot or other depots and you're recycling, then you're part of that residential program. That is overseen by the provincial government through a nonprofit called Recycle BC. They're a $100 million program that's funded through, every time we buy something at the grocery store, that's where that $100 million comes from. And they are overseen by the province in that they have to account for and report on where and how their material is getting recycled. So they can tell you, and they do in their annual report, how much of that is going to mills or processing facilities within North America, how much is going overseas, and they do that by material type. So instead of municipality by municipality having to try and market those materials, they're doing that at the provincial level, which gives them a heck of a lot more leverage. They have staff that are flying overseas to visit facilities that we could never afford to do on our own. So Vivian and I don't know, last week, the week before, it's all a blur. We went to their tour, so they offered tours of their two major processing facilities that they have in the Lower Mainland. So the flow of recycling from our community here is that the curbside trucks go to Mterra. They're a contracted collector and processing facility. They just bale the material, so they don't sort it there anymore. They've been asked to not do that because there's been a $30 million investment in the facilities in the Lower Mainland that can do it more efficiently. So that material gets baled for efficient transportation. It gets taken to the facility is called Urban Impact. GFL is the other major processor down there, and those two companies have the entire contract for processing for residential recycling. So we got to go through their material recovery facilities. And one of the amazing things to me was that within 30 hours of material coming in, it's been processed, sorted, rebaled, and is on a truck on the way out the door to a market. So, these are essential parts of our system. They're 24/7, 365 operations, and they're businesses. So they don't make money by taking that material and throwing it out, because our tip fees are not less than recycling. They're there to recycle. So, from that point, they still have to report on where that cardboard goes, where that plastic goes, where all those material streams are going. So subsequent to that, we got to go to the plastics recycler as well, which is called Merlin Plastics. And they're a world-class facility. They have facilities in California and other jurisdictions. And they're processing, just an inordinate amount of plastic, all kinds of plastic. And same thing, they pride themselves on telling you how little amount of material that comes through their facility goes to landfill. Anything that's, contaminated or they can't market might go to waste to energy, because they have the cement kilns in the Lower Mainland. We'll use that as an energy source if it's contaminated. But, their main thing is that they make the most amount of money off the highest value plastic they can pull out. So if it's FDA certified and it can go back into packaging, that's where they make their biggest margins, and that's what they're there to do. So, they also have invested significantly in their system, and that's about as much as I can say because I signed an NDA. But it's real. And so I do, there's a lot of media and stories, and they're great and they're catchy and they're headlines, but recycling is different everywhere across North America. It's different even, as I say, residential versus non-residential here in British Columbia. And if you follow the breadcrumbs just through the residential system, it's real. Everything else is another conversation, another answer, but I do hope people have confidence in the system.
Recycling works, folks, for those watching out.
Because I know
YouTube,
you guys
man.
get a lot of views on these meetings, right? This is
Huge.
yeah.
So many,
Huge.
over
Yeah.
60 sometimes. Yeah. Did you have something else, Councillor Terry?
Just a couple of questions. For all of the composting, I mean, that's reducing the amount of methane that's produced in the landfills, but does the composting itself produce methane? And what are we doing with that?
No, because it's an aerated process. So the pipes underneath the piles are adding air into the piles, so they don't create methane. So it's in an anaerobic, it's in a non-oxygen rich environment that the methane's created.
I see. Okay. Great. And then just something else you mentioned. Who about the height of the landfills? Who determines that? Is that us because we're the municipality, or is that a provincial regulation, or you were talking about increasing the height of the landfill, putting more garbage in the same footprint?
Yeah, it's not specific in our operating certificate. It's more through our design and operating plan. So our DOCP, Design, Operating, and Closure Plan.
Yeah.
So through that process, which is a document that we do consultation with the community on, and will receive approval, can receive approval from the province. So it is a provincial regulatory area, the height of the landfill, but certainly the village would be a part of that conversation as a stakeholder.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
My turn. Okay, so I did hear about the bus tour to the landfill, and I feel like we could fill a few more buses. So I'd love to see that happen again. I think it was really great, and people really came away with just a lot of energy around it. So that's really helpful. The videos that Tina and I don't know who the other woman that's
Jen,
in the
yeah.
Jen are doing are amazing. Like that education, I think, goes a long way because people can share it on social media and it's funny. And I appreciate the comments about the recycling as well. So I've been approached multiple times by because I was a school trustee first, but around institutional recycling and compost. And so can you just speak to that? How are schools and hospitals and stuff, where does that stuff go?
Yeah, we actually had a tour for industry of the organics facility on Friday, and a representative from Island Health came on the tour, and we were quite intrigued because we haven't had as much connection with them, and that's part of her role is expanding that. So I think we've got a great contact there and partners. So as long as she doesn't change jobs, then it'll be interesting to see where we can move on that. On the school side, we've seen these individual schools take really strong initiatives. Where we've come up against some challenges is that behavior change at the school district level, right? So where we see champions, either students or teachers or staff members that are really spearheading an individual initiative within a school, within a couple years, often it peters out because either that staff member's moved on or the school student has graduated. So implementing it within, the janitor's contract is something that the school district needs to lead. And, we're willing to have those conversations with them to understand better how to do that. Because it is, when we've talked to haulers, that's where the contract level is right now. It's not at the individual school. Mm-hmm. And so they want to see that sort of broad change to be most cost effective and efficient for them. Yep. That recycling would go to MTerra directly, likely, not through our facility. And we are looking at trying to work with the schools on, we had some initial conversations at least on soft plastics, but they haven't moved yet. So collecting soft plastics in the schools. And then on the organics side, we were just chatting earlier with staff about that. As we try to roll out more layers of organics diversion, schools would definitely be, one of the higher priority areas because there's so much ease of education. We have a full-time educator in the schools, and there's a lot of control there. Yeah. But we want to be cognizant of the amount of contamination that we receive. So it wouldn't be a full-blown rollout, but institutions like healthcare facilities where there's, food being cooked or food put in front of people that maybe their appetite isn't as much as it used to be, or they don't like that particular food. So you've got, a whole plate's worth of food that's being scraped off. Again, those sort of controls. So, maybe not the front end of Bigfoot, or the front end of Love's here, where it's just, I'm sure, a whole lot of cups. But yeah, that sort of back of house would be our easiest and high education centers.
Awesome. I think Cumberland Community School would be an excellent pilot project for that because it's just the one school in Cumberland. And they have, because they're K to 9, they have what's called leadership students who might pilot something like that for the long run. So yeah, I think that's I think they're doing it. Lots of schools are already doing it, but they're composting on site and then sometimes having issues with that. And I just had a question too about the private landfills. So who's regulating that? And I was not aware that there was that. And then follow up to that is a deconstruction bylaw in the future, potentially?
Yeah, so private landfills are regulated by the province. They are acknowledged within our solid waste management plan, and that's part of their authorization. The permits for some of these landfills are a bit older and outdated, and trying to get them to renew is within the province's jurisdiction. So they've all been issued permits from the province. That's their oversight. Our only real sort of overlap is that acknowledgement within our solid waste management plans for them to receive that material. So the authorization comes from the province themselves. So there's a few, and some of them are out of old industry, whether it's the forestry sector or the mills or pulp and paper, and then some of them are much like our landfills were, old aggregate sites that were turned into landfills. So
Yeah. It just seems like maybe not the ideal situation.
And then on your second point on deconstruction bylaws, model bylaws are something that we can consider creating, for municipalities to consider, but certainly there's some jurisdictions out there that have some now as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Nanaimo doesn't, though.
No, City of Victoria has.
Just City of Victoria.
And that's been, it's fairly new, so it would be interesting to see, and City of Vancouver as well. And they look at age brackets often, so like the age of the home.
Yeah.
You're not deconstructing a 1997 home usually.
Yeah, there's not much in there to save, I don't think. No offense to those homes, but.
Mine's lovely.
That's a lot of
Polly B's gone now.
Yeah, that's all I have, unless somebody else has a question. That's awesome. Thanks so much for being here and for leading this
Thanks for your time.
process. And let's get up to the top of that landfill again.
Makes a great photo op.
Thank you. And I think there's a recommendation to receive that delegation as well.
Recommend that council receive the delegation of Sherry Restrup, Teresa Clint. Oh, sorry.
Other
No,
one.
one more, a little far up here. Recommend the council receive the delegation from Strathcona Waste Management regarding Comox Strathcona Waste Management regarding the solid waste management planning process, step 3.
Second.
Apologies for the bungle.
And third, okay. Reports, street closure and noise bylaw exemption request for Rock the Block. Hello, Ryan. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so
Thank you, guys.
Good evening. So we're here tonight. What's before you are 2 approvals that would allow a Rock the Block concert on Dunsmuir Avenue this summer, August 17th, which is a Saturday. And so the 2 things that are put before you tonight are both the road closure of Dunsmuir from 10 a.m. until 1:30 a.m. Between 1st and 2nd Street. And noise control bylaw exemption from 10 p.m., which is when the bylaw currently allows amplified music, until 12:30 a.m. So the proposed concert, it's a ticketed event organized by a commercial business with a long history of staging music events in Cumberland. It would feature a fenced-off and licensed concert zone. Public access would be maintained along the south sidewalk. And there would be a contingency made for emergency access as well if needed. In terms of traffic disruptions, we've spoken to BC Transit, and one of the representatives has said that he at least doesn't have any concerns with this closure. Buses would be rerouted just down to Derwent for that one block, still come back up and hit the bus stop by the museum, which is one that we like to keep open if we can. Other traffic heading towards the lake, for example, all points west of 2nd Street would also be diverted via 2nd Street, so that is a small, via Derwent. Speaking with the applicant, he's been very willing to work with us to ensure that the appropriate notifications are made in that regard. He's also told us that he's reached out to nearby businesses, none of which have expressed any concerns. I've checked in with 2 of them, and both were supportive of the event. The applicant intends for this event to replace the Cumberland Wild event this year. So that, of course, has been a 3-day music festival that basically it takes over Village Park for a week with setup and takedown. So obviously a 1-day event as opposed to a 3-day event. It would give both the field of Village Park and the nearby residents around Village Park a bit of a break from large events over the summer. And with all of that in mind, despite the impacts to downtown, given the applicant's record of hosting successful events and abiding by terms of past permits, and then weighed against the cultural and social benefits of this event, the staff recommendation is that these 2 items are approved, but obviously I'll put that forward to you and welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Just more of a comment than anything else. It's it is with a heavy heart that I realize that the events that we used to have, Cumberland Wild and Atmosphere, and it was Big Time Out. It's been a bit of a tradition in the village, but it's nice to see that we actually have something to replace that. I know Cumberland's been a bit of a destination for that in mid-August, so. Both as an enthusiast and participant of block rockin' parties, nothing would stoke my froth more than this event, to use the modern vernacular of kids. So I wholeheartedly support this.
Councillor
Who's
Terry, would you
following
like
that?
to add your thoughts
That's
about
a tough act to follow.
rocking the block?
I guess a question, have we received any, since this agenda's gone out, has we received anything from anybody, any concerns or complaints about the going to 12:30 in the evening with this?
I haven't heard anything. Like I said, the only thing that I've heard are the 2 local businesses that I reached out to, both of which were supportive.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see a problem with having a party one night in the year. And then we'll see how that goes next year.
I did actually have one question, because I know, I think residents around the Cumberland Wild used to have, you'd get complimentary ticket or something if you were like in the immediate vicinity. Is there any, just to, if there's anybody like nearby that has something wrong with it, is that going to be accommodated? Not talking about me, but just,
It's just the guy that lives 2 blocks away.
No, it's nothing. It would just be somebody right in the immediate vicinity. Maybe that's
Really just the Francincinis, and I feel
yeah.
like
That's kind of what I was
they're
thinking.
going to want to be there for
Yeah.
sure.
Not that they want to be there, but just to smooth it over in case there was something.
That wasn't considered by staff.
Okay, no, I wouldn't imagine, but just maybe a consideration.
I have a question. So when we do these street closures, I get why we do it on Derwent, but do we have a secondary? Like, is there another route so that Derwent doesn't always have to have that? Is there another way to do it? Is that mostly about the bus, or just keeping it as close to the same route as possible, or
Yeah.
just because Penrith's too small? I don't know.
Honestly, Derwent was a route that we suggested when we reached out to BC Transit, and that's where that came from.
Yeah.
Typically, it's our operations department that works with BC Transit on those routes. So, yeah, I guess that's a long way of saying that I can't necessarily comment on that, but that's where Derwent came from in this instance, anyways.
Yeah, I feel like that's the easiest way, so. Okay, there's a recommendation there.
I'd like to recommend that council approve the temporary closure of Dunsmuir Avenue between 1st Street and 2nd Street from August 17th, 2024 at 10 a.m. until August 18th, 2024 at 1:30 a.m., subject to all other conditions of the event permit, and that council recommend that the Chief Administrative Officer approve a noise control bylaw exemption request from Cumberland Village Works to allow amplified music from the Rock the Block concert on Dunsmuir Avenue from 10 p.m. on August 17th, 2024 until 12:30 a.m. on August 18th, 2024.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Thanks. All in favor? Okay, there you
Thank
go.
you.
Thank you very much. Now we have stormwater. I brought the wrong glasses, so I have to keep putting stormwater management regarding 1 to 100-year storm events. Thanks for doing this already. Thanks, Fig.
Good evening.
Welcome.
All right, so this is a report for information regarding stormwater management in the village. It is stemming from a council resolution from April 11th, 2022, so apologies there, a bit of a delay, but plenty of time to reflect and review. So I think a little background information is prudent here. I'm not sure if anybody present is aware how stormwater management is designed in the engineering world. Probably not, or at least at a very high level. Basically, I mean, the easiest way to do it is to dumb it down into you design either for a minor system or a major system. So minor system is defined as some smaller scale pipe stuff, curbs, gutters, on-site stormwater management in like a smaller scale, and smaller culverts under residential streets, that kind of thing. And then major systems are more or less what they sound like, so larger things, so like larger culverts under collector and arterial roads, critical infrastructure that if it fails could cause loss of life or major loss of property, that kind of thing. So the minor systems typically are designed for a 1 in 10 year storm event, and this is very typical across the province and North America. And then major systems, depending on location and risk assessment, are between the 1 in 100 and the 1 in 200 year systems. So like major highways, they tend to be 1 in 200 years. Larger like critical infrastructure like dams, they'll be a 1 in 200 year sort of design consideration. Some examples of like major system here in the village would be like out in Bevan Road, the new culverts and ditch work there as part of the Bevan Road paving project. That is a 1 in 100 year storm design consideration. What else? Also some developments in town. So like some subdivisions that have stormwater detention systems, there'll be a 1 in 100 year storm event. And things that feed into those are like overland flow systems. So like basically just 1 in 100 year storm event is to get water away from areas, not really to contain and pipe. It's basically just to move water away and prevent loss of life and damage to property. And through this review, some good news: the bylaws don't need to be updated because they speak to two supporting documents: the Drainage Master Plan, which was done in 2010, which sounds like it's a long time ago, but it was actually really well done. A lot of the information that's in there now and the recommendations are very pertinent to today. So and relevant, so that's awesome. And the MMCD Design Guide, which was done in 2022, so it's still considered incredibly relevant.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rob, I'm not sure if you want to add anything, but that's just a very high-level report. Like stormwater management is a very complex and detailed thing. Like people do their PhDs on it, so to boil it down to just a 5-page report is, yeah.
Water flows downhill.
Yeah, more or less.
I think one thing to add was just the climate change adjustment factor that,
Yes.
that
the 15%?
Association of BC has included, like, that's pretty common practice now to add like a 50% factor to their design works.
And is there a conversation about increasing that,
Well, I would-
given,
I don't know specifically, but I would imagine over time, as we capture more data,
yeah,
we'll have a better understanding of, you know, what climate change impacts are and how we can design for them.
Yeah. Like increasing the 15% adjustment factor, you mean?
yeah,
Not that I'm aware of. So the data that we use for the design, that is what changes with climate change. So like IDF curves, they get updated every 1 to 2 years. So they incorporate historical data. So as climate change is developing, it's incorporated into the data. So that 15% is more or less just a buffer for future climate change consideration.
okay,
I mean, you can always add more if you want. Again, it depends on site-specific things and certain levels of risk. So like 15% is the minimum, but yeah, you're more than welcome to add more.
yeah. And so right now, our major, sorry, this, I think I was the one that made this motion, because it's a thing for me. So I'm going first for questions, which I don't normally do. So the major system that we have would be not going into our wastewater system. It would be diverting water away from our, well, I mean, some of it would go end up in the pipes,
Yeah.
but the point of that is to move it away. So it would be going into our wetlands or something like
Yeah.
that.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah, all new subdivisions separate stormwater from sanitary sewer.
Yeah.
It's the old parts of the
That are
community where
connected.
we still have those combined sewers. And we still have some street service runoff that end up in catch basins that have nowhere else to go, so they're tied into to
Right.
the sanitary sewer.
yeah, and I think the on-site stormwater management bylaw is great, because it manages it on-site with
Yep.
the whatever 15% increase. But I also wanted to just mention that the, when we do stormwater management plans for a property, we sometimes get this feedback about the water balance model and using a different, beyond the guidebook
Yep.
thing, and that's already what we're doing, yes? Okay. Okay, thanks. Anybody have questions?
Just kind of had a nerdy one there. So that 15%, is it reflected in the MMCD guidelines, or is it as far as it being a living document, or is it?
So that is best management practice from
Yeah.
EGBC.
Yeah. So that'll change every year.
Yeah, through
basically.
their internal reviews, and that's their recommendation. And you're hard pressed to find anybody that would do or suggest anything less
Yeah.
than 15%.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of questions. Are there any problem areas, I mean, besides the separation, are there any areas of town that are currently at risk if we have a 100-year event? Can we expect flooding anywhere at
Can we
this
say
point,
that in
or
a
is there
public meeting without
anywhere that
making
we
ourselves
need to
liable?
improve?
Yeah, I feel a little put on the spot.
Yeah, sorry.
So, in recent memory, I mean, in November 2021, when we had that provincial atmospheric
Yeah.
river event, and there's flooding across the province. I know the Royston Road culvert area. I mean, that was subject to near flooding,
Yeah.
which I think was an event that triggered some more. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but more intensive design considerations for the future wastewater treatment center. So
Okay.
I would say there, and then I mean, ultimately that culvert collapsed. So
Yeah.
I would say that was a
Point taken.
a
Yeah.
bad area.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess some of our I mean, we're not going to be able to divert all of our storm water. I'm just thinking even my neighborhood on Ulverston, that ditch that runs down Ulverston, that eventually ends up in the
Yeah.
in the Maple Lake Creek and into the, so those areas are always going to have their stormwater end up at the wastewater treatment
Yeah.
plant, right?
Yeah, and I didn't do a great job of explaining the minor system as well. Like, a part of that is, and Mayor Brown spoke to it about the water balance model. So ultimately your goal is trying to achieve pre-development flows in post-development. So like you're trying to control the amount of water that's flowing to an outflow, and that's one thing that that we'll do. So it's not like we're just dumping water in at like a high volume. It's getting water to where it needs to go, but in a manner that's sustainable and controlled.
Okay.
Yeah, so like a minor system, if you had a 1 in a 100-year event, your minor system may become inundated, so depending on the duration and intensity of the rainfall. And if it becomes inundated, then what you end up is with surface land overflow sometimes, right? So it could be perceived as flooding, but in the engineering world, they design that into specific routes to handle that flow,
Yeah.
to direct it to detention ponds, like they do, say, in Carlisle Lane.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the picture you had in there, yeah.
Yeah. One of the big things the province learned when I was up north was they had a lot of old infrastructure highway culverts that weren't designed to a 1 or 200-year event, and they had a lot of highways and railroads that were taken out. And so they now, everything, you know, highway infrastructure, like Joel mentioned, anything major infrastructure-wise is designed to a 1 and 200-year event, so.
So our road improvements and all that would be the same.
Well, not necessarily. So if it's
Not local.
if it's an arterial road, yes, for sure, you'd want to factor that in. But for a local road, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
No.
More permeable surfaces are always good.
That helps with
It helps,
yeah.
right?
It wouldn't help with the intense rainfall.
No.
So the major event, it would probably already be at capacity, and that's where you get the overland flow.
Yeah.
But it does help with the minor rain events.
Yeah.
Recharge the ground.
And then subsurface ground conditions play a huge part in that as well. So I mean,
Right, and we have a lot of bedrock and stuff.
in certain areas, like out in Bevan, again, as an example, it's great for soakaway trenches and like infiltration. So that's why bioswales and soakaway rain gardens up there are used so heavily, because the soil conditions are very favorable for that kind of design.
Right, okay. Awesome. Thank you. I think there's a recommendation there. Just receipt.
Just proceed.
Yep, I'll move receipt.
Second.
Third. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Joel, for doing that. Annual meeting on the 2023 annual report.
We have
Yeah,
published notice that the
okay.
report's available and that council will take questions and comments, and we have received none.
Nobody's here for our, so this is like our AGM? Sort of?
In a sense, yes.
Funny, okay. I'm just scrolling through because I did make notes in this version. I went through it a little more carefully. Couldn't find the belonging event, but then it was in the end. And does anybody else have any comments or anything, or is it just me? Oh, so there's a typo on page 56. At least I think it's a typo. It says under corporate services, a term communication, so maybe that's okay, but I think it's temporary term, or short term, maybe? It just seemed funny to me, didn't make sense. And I think that's all I had. It's lovely, thank you, hopefully people will actually look at it. The financial information is fascinating in this document. There's a lot of good notes. There's a lot of really good information. I highly recommend anyone in the village reading this document because it's all about how the corporation of the Village of Cumberland works and what we do all year long.
And I did have one question about that, and I guess I'll have to ask it to Michelle because Annie's not here. These numbers are end of year numbers. I'm on the very first statement A, page 65.
Yes, it's
Yeah. It's December 3rd.
year to date, so comparable to year to date.
Yeah, okay.
Previous.
I'm just wondering why we are
Sorry, year.
holding so much in cash and cash equivalents. Is that, and maybe I can answer my own question. Are we just, is that in preparation for all the money we're going to spend on wastewater treatment and climate action plans and things this year in 2024?
Yes, so that's some of the grants that we received as well as all our reserves. And you'll see in 2022, the investments were 14 million.
Yes.
And then now we have 20 in cash. So it's just an investment strategy. So the First Credit Union gives us a very favorable rate on our savings, and it's tied to prime. And so what it was happening was, before we were getting better rates with term deposits.
Yep.
And then the savings with this tied to prime, when the rate started going up, it was actually better to keep it in our savings, and we had a better rate than to lock it in.
I see. So it shows up in cash equivalents
That's right.
rather than in investments,
Yeah.
just because we're getting a better rate at that point. Okay.
That's right.
That makes
And
perfect sense.
every time something comes up, or every time, like Annie regularly looks at the investment rates, and then she decides where to put it.
Excellent. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And now we are on to seasonal community patrol.
We probably have
There's
to.
no, it just says consider. We've considered it, and there's no questions.
Oh.
So I don't think we need to do anything. Do we need to, do you want to receive it?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll move receipt of the annual report.
Second.
Third. Okay. Now seasonal community patrol budget.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Courtney Simpson, the Director of Development
You can't
Bylaw
fool
Services.
us.
Wasn't available tonight. So I'll just give a very brief introduction. And if there's any discussion, there's some parks implications with the proposed recommendation. So essentially, this is as part of the bylaw service review and reviewing different opportunities available with that funding resource. The concept of this report is for council to consider an opportunity to reallocate funds to essentially, what are we calling it? A foot patrol, a uniformed foot patrol at Lake Park as a pilot this summer, with about half that budget, which would enable weekend coverage and call-out service through a few of the local contractor providers are available to do that. And then retain the rest of that budget for kind of continuing the ongoing work of the bylaw service review. So, yeah, I think that's basically the gist of the report. If there's any questions, I think Michelle and I can try and answer.
Questions, council?
So this would be contracting this out to a company like Footprints or a private.
Yeah, a private security company.
And then they'll make patrols out there.
Yeah, to provide a very similar type of patrol. The community patrol position was not an enforcement position, so it's really about education and kind of boots on the ground presence. So it would just be limited to that location and likely supervised by the Lake Park Society.
Okay.
As opposed to village-wide under the previous.
And then are they going to follow the guidelines that we set out in our bylaw policy just a couple of weeks ago? Are they going to be familiarized with those or briefed on those as, the respect guidelines that we set up? And is that going to be sort of the basis of their enforcement out there?
Yeah, Courtney and I haven't discussed that training and what that kind of, I guess, onboarding of that service would specifically look like. I think we were awaiting the outcomes of this meeting, and then we would discuss with the Lake Park Society how do we, best inform that service provider to follow the practices that we would like to see in achieving, the goals of more people following the rules. And a big piece of it is managing
Parking.
traffic and and parking.
Boats and parking.
There'd be no bylaw tickets or anything like that from them. It would just be, right. Yeah.
Also, someone, it's more eyes and ears on the ground to be calling RCMP or emergency response or for towing companies, as opposed to seasonal, often like youth staff who are out there.
Also doing other jobs,
No, it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, there's a recommendation there.
I'll recommend that council reallocate the $10,200 in the 2024 budget for the community patrol part-time seasonal position as follows. $5,500 to the Cumberland Lake Park Contracted Services operating budget for the purpose of uniformed foot patrols, and $4,700 to the bylaw services review.
Second.
Third. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Kevin?
Now we have council member monthly reports. So Troy's is there, and I have a question. Mine was late, if anybody has questions on mine, but you have a note there about the inability to find a use for the methane gas. Do we know what the barrier, like, has Fortis ever come and talked to the board? Do we know
Yeah,
what the barrier
I don't know.
is?
They're having troubles moving it forward with Fortis, specifically the Campbell River one, because as she mentioned tonight, the amount of gas is continuously declining now that that one has closed. I'm not sure what exactly the holdup is with our local landfill, because we're putting in more cells, and something hopefully should be going on. Yeah. It's, there was talk of, at one point they were saying, you know, should we just be buying Bitcoin servers and using the methane to power Bitcoin servers? You know, they're looking at lots of possibilities, but yeah, they haven't settled on anything yet. And yes, the board is a bit frustrated that it is not moving forward.
It's super frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, any questions on mine? I don't even know where it is right now.
Yours is on a separate page.
It is. It's in a separate email and a separate page and a separate time, because I was really late.
Which I cannot even find at this moment. There it is. Was there a... Oh, you remembered to put in our Lake Park thing. I was there.
Yeah, the photo op.
I forget
For
to
the
put
new,
in. I forget to put in the photo ops.
Those fun barrels.
Yeah, the barrels are.
You're gonna call them the
awesome.
fun barrels?
Those fun barrels.
I don't know if that's a great.
I'm not sure that's a good marketing tip. No, maybe not. Maybe not. That monkey barrels, nope, not that either.
No,
That's okay. You can follow up another time if there anything pops up from that. Okay, so next is community nuisance bylaw. Community nuisance abatement bylaw. And this is our final look at it, I believe. So unless there are emerging things, we can just move that recommendation.
I recommend the council adopt the community nuisance abatement bylaw number 1210/2024.
second.
Third. Excellent. Okay, and no new business. There's, please check the website before you come down to these meetings that I'm about to announce, just in case things change. But for now, the Advisory Planning Commission is meeting on June 20th in Council Chamber at 4 p.m. Do we have any questions? No one. It's nothing. No. Okay, well then, can somebody make that closed portion recommendation?
Sure. I'll move that council close the meeting to the public pursuant to section 90 of the community charter to consider the security of the property of the municipality and law enforcement if the council considers that disclosure could be reasonably be expected to harm the conduct of an investigation under or enforcement of an enactment.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?